Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
They told us the humans were scavengers, bottom feeders. The kind of species that built fragile colonies on dying rocks and called it civilization. We believed them. We invaded their quiet little corner of the void, expecting gratitude, maybe even worship, for bringing them into the galactic fold. What we got instead was a lesson written in fire and blood, and the kind of stubbornness that makes stars burn cold with envy. The observation deck of the harmonious ascension hummed with the kind of silence that comes before something breaks. Commander Velkrith stood with 4 of his upper appendages clasped behind his carapace, watching the blue-green marble rotate beneath them. Earth, the humans called it. A backwater speck barely worth the fuel to reach it. Preliminary scans complete. Commander, the sensor technician, a young Dravi with barely developed ridges, clicked her mandibles nervously. Population centers confirmed. Technological level approximately 7 centuries behind standard galactic admission protocols. Velkrith's compound eyes refracted the planet's light into 1,000 fragmented impressions. Primitive, isolated, ripe. Military capabilities? Kinetic projectiles, chemical propulsion, nuclear fission in its infancy. She paused. Sir, they still use combustion engines for personal transport. A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. Someone in the back made a chittering sound that translated roughly to laughter. Velkrith allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The Dravi Collective had spent 3 centuries expanding through this arm of the galaxy, bringing order to chaos, and structure to the scattered species fumbling in the dark. Most joined willingly once they understood the benefits. The others, well, the Collective had protocols for resistance, but Earth wouldn't resist. How could it? Begin standard integration procedures, Velkrith ordered. Target the largest population center, North American continent, Eastern Seaboard. We'll start with their United Nations facility. They seem to use it for interspecies coordination. Interspecies, sir? The technician's antennae twitched with confusion. They have over 200 separate governing bodies on a single planet. Velkrith's voice carried the weight of someone explaining something to a particularly slow larva. They cannot even unify their own kind. He turned from the viewport, mandibles clicking in anticipation. This would be simple. 3 days, maybe 4. Standard diplomatic overture, demonstration of superior technology. The humans would see reason. They always did. Nobody ever wanted to be vaporized from orbit. The harmonious ascension descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling cathedral. 5 kilometers of gleaming biometal, shaped like a nautilus shell if a nautilus had been designed by a committee of architects who'd never seen the ocean. It settled over New York City with the kind of casual disregard for local air traffic patterns that came from having fusion drives and not caring about anyone else's flight plans. Within 6 hours, every screen on the planet showed the same image. Velkrith standing in what the Dravi considered their most diplomatic chamber, surrounded by holographic displays of conquered, no, integrated worlds. People of Earth, he began. His words translated into 4,000 languages simultaneously by software that had been perfecting this speech for generations. We are the Dravi Collective. We bring you an opportunity. He let that word hang. Opportunity, not ultimatum, not surrender. The linguistics team had tested it extensively. For too long, your species has suffered in isolation, divided, warring among yourselves, wasting resources on trivial conflicts while the galaxy moves forward without you. Velkrith gestured with 3 appendages toward the holographic displays. We offer you membership, protection, access to technologies that will end disease, hunger, scarcity. All we ask in return is your cooperation. The transmission ended with coordinates for where Earth's leaders should send their representatives. Then they waited. Doctor? Sarah Chen stood in the Pentagon's Crisis Command Center, watching the alien speech for the 5th time. Around her, generals argued. Politicians shouted. Intelligence analysts pulled up every piece of science fiction media ever produced, as if Star Trek might have somehow predicted this exact scenario. They're lying. She said it quietly, but the room went silent anyway. General Marcus Webb turned to her, his face carved from stone and 40 years of military service. Explain. The language. Sarah pulled up her own analysis on the central display. Look at the semantic structure. They're using high compliance trigger words. Opportunity instead of choice. Cooperation instead of submission. This isn't a first contact protocol. It's a sales pitch. So what? Senator Richardson's voice dripped with the kind of impatience that came from being interrupted during a panic. Maybe they're just being polite. Sarah zoomed in on Velkrith's face during a particular phrase. Watch his secondary mandibles when he says, protection. See that micro movement? My xenolinguistics AI flagged it as a dominance display. And here, she skipped ahead, when he mentions trivial conflicts, there's a harmonic resonance in his voice that indicates contempt. Webb leaned forward. You're saying this is a threat? I'm saying this is a script they've used before, probably dozens of times, and I'm willing to bet it usually works. The room fell quiet, except for the hum of electronics and the distant rumble of fighter jets being scrambled outside. What do you recommend? Webb asked. Sarah thought about every anthropological study she'd ever read, every analysis of colonial contact throughout human history. The patterns were always the same. The technologically superior force arrives, makes generous offers, then tightens the noose slowly until resistance becomes impossible. Stall them, learn everything we can, and whatever we do... She looked at the frozen image of Velkrith's face. We don't show fear. Even if we should be afraid? Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Especially then. The human delegation arrived 72 hours later at the designated coordinates, an open field in rural Kansas chosen specifically because it was flat, empty, and completely indefensible. The Dravi had done this before. Velkrith watched them disembark from their primitive aircraft with something approaching pity. Like 12 humans, soft-bodied, slow-moving. Their environmental suits were laughably crude, as if they feared the air itself might be toxic. They feared everything, these humans. The lead delegate removed her helmet. Dark skin. Graying hair pulled back in what Velkrith's cultural database identified as a professional style. She met his compound gaze without flinching. Ambassador Chen. Her voice carried across the field through translation software that made his own seem prehistoric. Representing the United Earth Coalition. Velkrith's antennae twitched. United Earth Coalition. They'd formed a unified government in 3 days. Unexpected, but ultimately meaningless. Commander Velkrith of the Dravi Collective. Have you considered our offer? Chen smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Velkrith's defensive carapace itch. We have questions first. Of course they did. They always did. Velkrith settled into what his briefing materials called the patient elder pose. All appendages relaxed, compound eyes dimmed to appear non-threatening. Ask. How many species are part of your collective? 247. And how many of those joined voluntarily? Velkrith paused. The question had been phrased carefully. Too carefully. All members of the collective are willing participants in galactic harmony. That's not what I asked. The other humans remained perfectly still. Not fidgeting. Not showing fear. Just waiting. Velkrith felt the first flutter of something unfamiliar in his thorax. Not quite alarm. More like the sensation of stepping on ground that looked solid but gave way slightly under pressure. The collective represents the natural evolution of civilization, he said, falling back on approved doctrine. Species that resist integration do so out of ignorance. Once educated, they invariably see the benefits. So you educate them. Chen's smile hadn't wavered. How? Demonstrations of capability, technological exchanges, cultural, bombardment from orbit? The field went very quiet. Velkrith's defensive ridges began to rise involuntarily. The collective only uses force when a species poses a threat to galactic stability. Define threat. Any civilization that refuses integration and possesses weapons capable of... So every species that says no gets classified as a threat. How convenient. One of the other humans, a male with silver hair and more medals than Velkrith had seen outside a museum, stepped forward. We've been watching your ship's positioning over our cities, General Webb said quietly. Those aren't observation arrays, they're bombardment platforms. Velkrith's carapace went rigid. They shouldn't have been able to identify military systems. Their technology was centuries behind. A precaution, he said carefully. Standard protocol. For peaceful integration. For mutual safety. Chen tilted her head. Commander, I'm going to be very clear with you. We appreciate the offer. We're genuinely interested in joining the galactic community. But we're not going to be conquered and told we volunteered. You misunderstand? No, I don't think I do. Chen's voice dropped to something almost gentle. I think you've done this so many times that you've forgotten what actual cooperation looks like. I think you show up and make threats disguised as opportunities, and most species fold because the alternative is extinction. She paused. We're not most species. Velkrith felt his combat glands beginning to secrete. This was going wrong. The script was being torn up. These primitives were supposed to be grateful, awed, compliant. You have 48 hours to accept our terms, he said, abandoning diplomacy for the underlying threat it had always concealed. After that, we will assume hostile intent and respond accordingly. 48 hours. Chen nodded as if he'd just suggested a reasonable deadline for a contract negotiation. We'll be in touch. The humans turned and walked back to their aircraft. No running, no panic. Just 12 bipedal mammals walking away from a being who could order their entire species cremated with a thought. Velkrith watched them go and felt something he hadn't experienced in his 2 centuries of service. Uncertainty. They threatened us. President Jackson's voice carried through the secure bunker where Earth's leadership had gathered. A species with the power to glass our planet threatened us, and you smiled at them? Sarah Chen stood at the head of the table, still wearing her diplomatic suit. Yes, sir. Are you out of your mind? Possibly. She pulled up a holographic display. But I learned something important today. They're predictable. Everything they said, every gesture, every tonal shift, it followed a pattern. They've been using the same playbook for centuries. General Webb leaned back in his chair. So what? So patterns can be exploited. Sarah zoomed in on the harmonious ascension. They parked their ship over New York because it's our largest population center. Maximum psychological impact. But look at the orbital mechanics. She ran a simulation. They're locked in a geosynchronous position. It would take them approximately 14 minutes to adjust to a different target. And look at their weapon arrays. They're positioned for wide-area bombardment, not precision strikes. Meaning they expect us to cluster together in terror. Meaning they've never fought an enemy that dispersed, that hid, that used their own size against them. The Secretary of Defense, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who'd started her career defusing IEDs in Lagos, spoke up. You're talking about asymmetric warfare. I'm talking about guerrilla tactics on a planetary scale. Sarah pulled up images from Earth's history. Vietnam, Afghanistan. Every successful insurgency against a technologically superior force. They have better weapons, better ships, better technology, but they're used to winning through intimidation, through overwhelming force applied to conventional targets. We don't have conventional targets anymore, Webb said slowly. Exactly. As of 6 hours ago, we started Operation Scattered Seed. Every major government function has been duplicated and dispersed to underground facilities. Command and control networks have been decentralized. We've hidden manufacturing capacity in caves, old mines, anywhere their sensors won't easily detect it. President Jackson looked pale. You did this without authorization. I did it while you were arguing about whether to surrender. Sarah's voice carried an edge that could cut glass. Sir, with respect, we have 46 hours left. We can spend it debating, or we can spend it preparing. Preparing for what? We can't win a war against them. Sarah's smile returned, the same one that had made Velkrith's carapace itch. Who said anything about winning? We just need to make them realize that conquering us would cost more than it's worth. They'll kill millions. They'll try. But sir, she gestured to the map of dispersed humanity spreading across the globe like a virus adapting to antibiotics. We've spent our entire history fighting things that wanted to kill us. Ice ages, plagues, each other. We're very, very good at surviving things that should destroy us. She pulled up the final slide. The Dravi Collective has integrated 247 species. They've perfected the art of peaceful conquest. But they've never met a species that was too stubborn to die properly. The room fell silent. Ma'am, a young aide spoke up hesitantly. What if this doesn't work? What if we just make them angry? Sarah thought about every colonial empire in human history. The ones that tried to hold on to territories that refused to be held. The cost in blood and treasure. The slow realization that some victories were more expensive than defeat. Then we make them very, very angry, and we make sure that anger costs them dearly. She looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Fear, uncertainty, but underneath it, something else. The same thing that had driven apes down from trees, that had pushed boats into unknown oceans, that had looked at the moon and decided it was reachable. Stubbornness wrapped in curiosity and set on fire. 46 hours, people. Let's show them what happens when you wake the two-legged storm. The deadline came and went like a held breath released. Velkrith stood on the bridge of the Harmonious Ascension, watching the chrono display tick past the 48-hour mark. No response from Earth. No capitulation. No begging for mercy. Just silence. Scan the United Nations facility, he ordered. The sensor technician worked her console, compound eyes reflecting the data streams. Commander, it's empty. Define empty. No life signs, no power signatures. The building appears to have been abandoned approximately 36 hours ago. A cold sensation spread through Velkrith's thorax. The other government centers, check them all. The results came back in a cascade of negatives. Washington, D.C., abandoned. Beijing, evacuated. London, Moscow, Delhi, Brasilia, all empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, just vacant. Where did they go? The question came from Sub-Commander Thrax, a veteran of 17 integration campaigns. Velkrith's mandibles clicked in agitation. Everywhere and nowhere, they've dispersed. It was the worst possible response. The collective's integration protocol relied on decapitation strikes. Eliminate leadership, destroy command infrastructure, and the body politic collapsed into chaos. But you couldn't decapitate something that had scattered its heads across an entire planet. Recommendations? Velkrith turned to his tactical officer, a grizzled Dravi named Shektar, who'd fought in the last true war the collective had faced 6 decades ago against the Krell Hive. Shektar's combat ridges were already raised. Sir, this is a prepared response. They knew exactly what we'd do. That's impossible. They're primitives. Primitives don't evacuate an entire planetary government in 36 hours without leaving a trace. Shektar pulled up thermal scans of Earth's surface. Look at the dispersion pattern. They're not running randomly. This is coordinated, planned. Velkrith studied the data. Shektar was right. The humans had spread like a deliberate infection, moving to areas that would be difficult to target without massive collateral damage. Mountains, dense urban centers, underground facilities. Begin bombardment of the primary population centers, Velkerith ordered. If they won't negotiate, we'll remind them why negotiation is preferable to extinction. Sir? The sensor technician's voice carried an edge of panic. We're being painted. What? Multiple targeting locks. Hundreds of them, from the surface. Velkerith's defensive carapace went rigid. That's impossible. They don't have the technology to... The harmonious ascension shuddered. Not violently, just a tremor, like something had tapped against the hull. Then another, and another. Report! Kinetic impactors, sir. Primitive railgun technology. They're launching metal slugs from surface installations. No explosive payloads, just mass and velocity. Shektar pulled up the damage assessment. Minimal damage to primary hull. But sir, look at the quantity. The display showed launch sites lighting up across North America, then Europe, Asia, South America. Hundreds of weapons platforms that hadn't existed in the intelligence scans, all firing solid metal projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Individually, they were gnats. Annoying. Barely worth noticing. But there were thousands of them. Raise shields to full power, Velkerith ordered. Sir, that will drain our fusion reserves by 30%. Do it. The bombardment continued. Not enough to damage the ship seriously, but enough to be noticed, enough to be expensive. Velkerith's combat glands were fully active now. This wasn't how integration worked. Species either surrendered or got vaporized. They didn't poke you with primitive weapons while hiding in halls. Target the launch sites, precision strikes. The weapons officer hesitated. Sir, they're in populated areas. Collateral casualties would be... Target them. Lances of plasma rained down from the harmonious ascension, turning railgun emplacements into glass and ash. The feed showed infrastructure melting, buildings collapsing. But the humans didn't stop shooting. For every site destroyed, 2 more lit up. They were mobile, dug in, dispersed so thoroughly that killing them all would require sterilizing the entire planet, which, Velkerith realized with growing horror, was exactly what they'd calculated. Sir, incoming transmission from the surface. Sarah Chen's face appeared on the display. She was sitting in what looked like a bunker, wearing casual clothing instead of the diplomatic suit. Relaxed, comfortable. Commander Velkerith, how's your fuel situation? The question landed like a physical blow. You are attacking a collective warship with primitive kinetics. This is futile. Is it? Chen smiled. Let's do some math. Your shields are incredible. I'm genuinely impressed. Our scientists estimate you could maintain them for, 6 months? Under sustained fire. Probably longer if you weren't also running life support, sensors, weapons systems, and all the other energy-intensive functions of a ship your size. She leaned forward. But here's the thing, Commander. We don't need to destroy you. We just need to make you choose between maintaining shields and doing literally anything else. And unlike you, our weapons run on magnetic acceleration and gravity. Very cheap. Very sustainable. Velkerith's mandibles clenched. You cannot win this war. War? Chen laughed. Commander, this isn't a war. This is pest control. We're mosquitoes. Annoying. Persistent. Hard to kill without burning down your own house. The collective has sterilized more advanced species than yours for less provocation. I'm sure you have. But you've never sterilized a species that had dispersed its entire population across underground bunkers, mountain fortresses, and submarine colonies. Chen's smile turned sharp. Do you know how deep our minds go? How many caves we've mapped? How much of our manufacturing we can relocate underground in a matter of weeks? She pulled up a holographic display showing Earth's crust honeycomb with human habitation. You can glass the surface, turn our cities to ash, kill billions, and we'll still be here, shooting at you, draining your fuel, making your shields choose between protecting you from our primitive kinetics or letting your crew breathe vacuum. Velkerith felt something he hadn't experienced in his entire military career. Uncertainty approaching fear. What do you want? Now we're negotiating. Chen's expression softened slightly. We want what we wanted from the beginning. Cooperation, not integration, not conquest, an actual partnership between equals. You are not our equals. Technologically? No, absolutely not. You could wipe us out if you committed to it. But Commander, she leaned back in her chair, we've studied your collective. We've analyzed every integration campaign you've conducted over the past 3 centuries. You know what we learned? Velkrith didn't respond. You've never fought a war lasting more than 6 months. Every species either surrendered in the first few weeks or got annihilated from orbit. You don't have logistics for extended guerrilla warfare. You don't have the cultural stomach for it. And most importantly, Chen's smile returned, your collective council would never approve the resources needed to dig us out of every cave, mine, and bunker on this planet. She was right. The realization hit Velkrith like a plasma bolt to the thorax. The collective's strength was its overwhelming technological superiority, applied quickly and decisively. But Earth wasn't playing that game. They were playing the long game, the expensive game, the kind of war that consumed resources and political will until even victory tasted like defeat. We're prepared to offer terms, Velkrith said carefully. Good. Here are ours. Chen pulled up a document. 1. Earth maintains complete political sovereignty. 2. We establish embassies and trade relations with the collective as independent partners. 3. Technology exchanges occur on mutually agreed terms, not as tribute. 4. Your ship leaves our orbit within 72 hours and doesn't return without invitation. Those terms are unacceptable. Then we keep shooting. Chen's voice carried no malice, just statement of fact. Your shields are down to 74% efficiency. Our weapons are just getting warmed up. How long do you want to play this game, Commander? The emergency council session on the Dravi homeworld was tense enough to make carapaces crack. High Chancellor Vexthar listened to Velkrith's report with all 4 auditory organs focused to the point of pain. Around the chamber, the collective's leadership bristled with barely contained outrage. They shot at you, with kinetics. Councillor Thrain's voice dripped with disbelief. And you're recommending we accept their terms? I'm recommending we avoid a resource drain that could destabilize 17 sectors, Velkrith responded. The humans have demonstrated a capacity for sustained asymmetric warfare that our integration protocols were not designed to counter. So we adapt the protocols. With respect, Counselor, adaptation would require either complete planetary sterilization, which violates collective law regarding pre-spaceflight species, or a ground invasion lasting potentially decades. The humans have prepared for both scenarios. Vexthar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Explain. Velkrith pulled up the intelligence his team had gathered. They've dispersed their population across thousands of hardened sites. They've hidden manufacturing capacity that our sensors cannot penetrate. They've demonstrated a willingness to accept massive casualties in service of resistance. And most concerning, they've reverse-engineered our basic shield harmonics. That caused a stir. Impossible, Thrain said flatly. They captured debris from our first bombardment. Within 48 hours, they'd analyzed the molecular structure and deduced the frequency modulation we use for defensive screens. They can't replicate it yet, but they understand it. Give them a year, maybe 2, and they'll have working collective-grade shields. Then we eliminate them before they achieve parity. At what cost? Velkrith felt his combat fatigue settling into his joints. We'd need to commit a minimum of 15 warships. Ground forces numbering in the millions. Sustained bombardment that would make the planet uninhabitable for centuries. And even then, our analysts estimate a 37% chance of resistance cells surviving in deep underground facilities. He paused. For what gain? Earth has minimal strategic resources. No rare elements we can't obtain elsewhere. Their only value was as a simple integration to maintain our expansion momentum. But they've made themselves expensive, High Chancellor. Prohibitively so. The chamber fell silent. Vexthar had led the collective for 6 decades. He'd overseen the integration of 43 species. He understood the calculus of conquest better than anyone in the room. What are they offering in exchange for independence? Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, access to their biological research. Apparently they have significant advancements in genetic medicine that could benefit our medical facilities. And Velkrith pulled up the final document. A mutual defense pact. They want us to protect them? Thrain's laughter echoed through the chamber. They want to protect us. Velkrith highlighted the relevant section. Their analysts have identified 3 potential threats to collective space over the next century. They're offering to assist in defensive operations. Primitives protecting the collective. This is absurd. Is it? Velkrith thought about those railgun emplacements, the dispersed population, the speed with which they'd adapted to an existential threat. Counselor, I've fought in 17 integration campaigns. I've never seen a species respond to first contact by immediately preparing for total war. These humans have something we've bred out of our collective species over centuries of peaceful integration. What's that? Paranoia elevated to an art form. They spent their entire pre-contact history assuming the worst and preparing for it. They've fought each other in conflicts spanning continents. They've survived ice ages, plagues, asteroid impacts. They are evolutionarily optimized for not dying when they should. Velkrith pulled up the final image from Earth, a human child drawing on the wall of a bunker. Crude art showing stick figures shooting at a triangular shape in the sky. They're teaching their offspring about us, how to fight us, how to survive us. Give them a generation, and every human child will grow up knowing how to kill Dravi. Is that the legacy we want? A species that views us as existential enemies? Vexthar studied the image for a long moment. Or, the High Chancellor said slowly, we could have allies who are very, very good at surviving impossible situations. The treaty was signed on neutral ground, a space station the humans had been building in secret for the past 40 years. Velkrith watched Ambassador Chen affix humanity's seal to the document and felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. Congratulations, Ambassador. Earth is now an independent partner of the Dravi Collective. Thank you, Commander. Chen's smile was genuine this time, and thank you for listening. Most species in your position wouldn't have. Most species in our position haven't been shot at with railguns by primitives. Chen laughed. Fair point. For what it's worth, that we're genuinely interested in cooperation. We have a lot to learn from the collective. And we from you, apparently. Velkrith gestured to the space station around them. You built this in secret, for 4 decades. We've been watching the stars for a long time, Commander. We knew we weren't alone. We just didn't know if our neighbors would be friendly. She paused. Turns out, they're not friendly, but they're reasonable. An important distinction. They stood in silence for a moment. 2 species that had nearly gone to war now bound by treaty and mutual wariness. Can I ask you something, Ambassador? Of course. Did you really believe you could win against the full might of the collective? Chen's expression grew serious. No, but we believed we could make you decide that winning wasn't worth the cost. There's a difference between being strong enough to conquer and being willing to pay the price of conquest. A human philosopher? Every human with half a brain and a history book. She smiled again. We're very good at learning from our mistakes, Commander. We've conquered each other enough times to know how it works, how it costs, how it fails. Velkrith thought about the collective's long history of peaceful integration. Species joining willingly, gratefully, until they forgot they'd ever had a choice. Perhaps we should learn from your mistakes as well. That's what allies do. The report reached every corner of collective space within a week. Earth had negotiated independence. The humans had shot at a collective warship and lived. More than lived. They'd gained partnership status without firing a single kill shot. The reaction was predictable. Some species saw it as weakness. Others saw opportunity. But the ones who'd been integrated most recently saw something else. Hope. In a bunker beneath what used to be Geneva, Sarah Chen read the intelligence reports with growing concern. 17 species had made formal inquiries about the terms of Earth's treaty. 43 more had begun asking questions about their own integration agreements. "We've destabilized the collective," General Webb said quietly. "We've shown them that saying no is possible." Sarah pulled up the communication logs. "They're calling us, species we've never heard of, asking how we did it, asking if we can help them. Can we?" Sarah thought about the cost. The billions who'd evacuated their homes, the cities abandoned, the permanent shift to a war footing that would define human civilization for generations. "I don't know, but we have to try." "Why? We got what we wanted. Independence, survival." "Because..." Sarah looked at the messages scrolling past, pleas from species she couldn't even pronounce. "We're not the only ones who deserve the right to say no." She pulled up a new document, started drafting. General Webb read over her shoulder. "You're writing a manual. How to resist integration. How to negotiate from a position of disadvantage. How to make yourself expensive. How to survive." Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Everything we learned. Everything we did. We're giving it away. The collective will see this as an act of war. The collective will see this as proof that we meant what we said about being allies who protect our partners." Sarah's smile returned. "We're not arming species to fight them. We're teaching species how to avoid fighting altogether. How to earn respect instead of becoming subjects." Webb was quiet for a long moment. "You know this changes everything." "Good. Everything needed changing." Velkerith received the transmission 6 weeks after the treaty signing. A simple data packet. No threats, no demands, just information. The manual Sarah Chen had written. He read it cover to cover, mandibles clicking in agitation. Then he read it again. It was brilliant, terrifying. A step-by-step guide to making integration so expensive that conquest became economically irrational. Everything the humans had done, documented and explained. Tactics that would work against any technologically superior force. "They're sharing it," Shekhtar said quietly. "With everyone." "I know. The Council will demand we suppress it." Velkerith thought about the messages already spreading through collective space. The questions. The quiet resistance beginning in species that had been integrated for decades. "We can't suppress an idea, old friend. We can only adapt to it." "How?" Velkerith pulled up the treaty with Earth again. Read the terms. Thought about what the humans had actually asked for. Respect. Partnership. Choice. "We change the collective. Make integration actually voluntary. Offer real benefits instead of veiled threats. Or become the allies we've always claimed to be." That would mean admitting we've been conquerors all along. Yes. Velkerith's carapace settled into an unfamiliar position. Humble. Yes, it would. He looked at the data packet again. Sarah Chen's gift to the galaxy. A weapon disguised as a manual. A challenge wrapped in cooperation. "The humans have done us a favor, Shekhtar. They've shown us what we've become. Now we have the chance to become something better. Or crush them for the insult." Velkerith thought about the railgun emplacements, the dispersed population, the child's drawing of stick figures fighting impossible odds. "We tried crushing them. It didn't work. Perhaps it's time to try learning from them instead." He initiated a response transmission, not to Sarah Chen, to the collective council. Time to wake up the Dravi. Before the two-legged storm taught the entire galaxy how to resist. 3 years after first contact, the galaxy looked different. Not physically. The stars still burned. The trade routes still functioned. The Dravi Collective still administered 247 member species across 17 sectors. But something had shifted. A subtle vibration running through the foundation of galactic civilization. Ambassador Chen called it the Whisper Network. Velkerith called it a nightmare wrapped in plausible deniability. He stood in his office on the collective homeworld, reviewing intelligence reports that made his combat glands ache. 17 species had formally renegotiated their integration agreements. 43 more had filed grievances. And everywhere, Everywhere, there were copies of that thrice-damned manual circulating in encrypted channels the collective couldn't quite shut down. The Thexian Mining Collective has refused quota increases for the third consecutive quarter, his aide reported. They cite the Earth precedent. Of course they did. The Kelvar Republic is demanding embassy status instead of protectorate classification. Earth precedent? Earth precedent. Velkrith's mandibles clicked in frustration. The humans had done more damage with a data packet than most species managed with actual weapons. They'd given the galaxy a vocabulary for resistance, a framework for negotiation, a template for saying no without saying die. Where is Ambassador Chen now? Taraxis Prime. Betrayed negotiations with the Vryn Confederation. Velkrith pulled up the surveillance feed, what little they had. Chen was sitting in a garden that shouldn't exist on a desert planet, drinking something steaming with a Vryn diplomat who looked far too comfortable for someone meeting with the species that had humiliated the Dravi Collective. They were laughing. "She's recruiting," Velkrith muttered. "Sir?" "Nothing. Schedule a conference with the Council. We need to discuss the human situation before it metastasizes further." Sarah Chen sipped her tea and watched the Vryn diplomat's secondary eyes dilate with interest. Kayeth was a careful player. Smart. The kind of politician who'd survived 3 regime changes by being useful to all sides. "The humans defeated the Dravi," Kayeth said slowly. This is known. We negotiated with them. There's a difference." "A difference you were kind enough to document." Kayeth's gill slits fluttered. Amusement. "The manual is quite comprehensive." Sarah smiled. "The manual is a historical record of our first contact. Nothing more." "Of course. And yet species across the collective seem to be experiencing remarkably similar historical circumstances. Funny how that works." Kayeth leaned back, his scaled form catching the artificial sunlight. "What do you want from us, Ambassador?" "Trade. Cultural exchange. Maybe some joint research on desert reclamation. We've been terraforming Mars for 50 years now, and I think we could learn from each other." "And?" Sarah's smile widened. "And I want to know if you're happy." The question hung in the air like a physical thing. Happy? With your arrangement, with the collective, with being told what to mine, where to trade, who to associate with. Sarah set down her tea. "I want to know if the Vryn Confederation feels like it joined the collective, or if it feels like the collective happened to you." Kayeth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried centuries of careful political survival. "That is a dangerous question, Ambassador. Only if the answer is yes. And if it is, then maybe we can help you ask some dangerous questions of your own." The Collective Council met an emergency session for the 5th time that year. Velkrith stood before them, presenting data he'd rather have buried in a star. "The situation has escalated beyond simple trade disputes," he reported. "We're now seeing coordinated resistance to collective policies across 42 member species. Not armed resistance, they're too clever for that, but economic resistance, cultural resistance, legal challenges to agreements that have stood for centuries." High Chancellor Vex Thar's compound eyes reflected the chamber's bioluminescence in 1,000 fragments. "And you attribute this to the humans? Directly? No. The humans are scrupulously careful to operate within the bounds of their treaty. But Ambassador Chen has visited 17 systems in the past year. Everywhere she goes, integration agreements get renegotiated within 6 months. Correlation is not causation. No, High Chancellor. But when every renegotiation follows the exact pattern outlined in Chen's manual, when every species suddenly develops the same tactics for making themselves economically expensive to coerce, when our own integration protocols start failing with statistical impossibility, Velkrith pulled up the latest projections. Then correlation starts looking suspiciously like intentional design. Councillor Thrain's ridges were fully raised. We should revoke Earth's treaty. Classify them as a hostile power. On what grounds? They haven't violated a single term of the agreement. They're destabilizing the collective. They're teaching other species to negotiate. Vexthar's voice cut through the rising cacophony. There's a difference, Counselor. A semantic one. A legal one. Which matters considerably when we're discussing treaty obligations with a species that has proven remarkably good at exploiting legal frameworks to their advantage. The chamber fell quiet. Velkrith felt a grudging respect for the High Chancellor. Vexathar understood what many of the Council refused to see. The humans had outmaneuvered them not through superior force, but through superior understanding of how civilizations actually functioned. "What do you recommend, Commander?" Vexthar asked. Two options. First, we adapt. Reform integration protocols to be genuinely voluntary. Offer real benefits instead of ultimatums. Become the benevolent alliance we've always claimed to be. And the second? Velkrith pulled up a tactical assessment he'd been running for months. Yeah, we demonstrate to one of the newer resistance movements what happens when the collective stops being patient. Make an example. Show the galaxy that there are limits to our tolerance. You're suggesting we destroy a member species? I'm suggesting we remind them why they joined in the first place. The Council erupted in debate. Velkrith listened to the arguments, moral, practical, political, and felt the weight of inevitability settling over him. They were going to choose option 2. He could see it in their posture, hear it in their voices. The collective had spent 3 centuries as the dominant power in this sector. They weren't ready to admit that dominance had been built on intimidation rather than genuine cooperation. Pride was about to make a very expensive decision. The warning came through encrypted channels that technically didn't exist. Sarah was in her office on the Earth Embassy station when the message appeared on her supposedly secure terminal. No sender, no signature. Just coordinates and a timestamp. 48 hours. She pulled up the coordinates. A system called Breivix. Population, 4 billion. Collective member for 8 years. Recent signatory to what the Whisper Network was calling the Autonomy Accords, a formal alliance of species seeking to renegotiate their integration terms. Oh no. General Webb appeared in her doorway 30 seconds after she hit the emergency call. He'd been military too long to not recognize the particular tone of impending disaster. What happened? The collective is going to make an example. Sarah pulled up everything she had on Breivix. The Breivixians filed for embassy status 6 months ago. The collective denied it. They filed again. Got denied again. Now they're refusing to meet mineral export quotas until their status is addressed. Standard resistance playbook, from your manual. From my manual. The words tasted like ash. And now the collective is going to glass them to remind everyone else what happens when you push too hard. Webb studied the data. Can we stop it? We don't have ships in that sector. Even if we did, we can't win a shooting war with the collective. That was never the point. Then what was the point? Sarah pulled up the communication network she'd spent 3 years building. Thousands of contacts across hundreds of species, diplomats, traders, scientists, cultural attachés, and all connected through the kind of informal relationships that looked innocent on paper but functioned like neural pathways in a larger organism. The point was making them choose between being conquerors or allies. They're choosing conquerors. Now we remind them what that choice costs. She started typing. The Harmonious Ascension entered Breivixian space with 4 sister ships. Overwhelming force. Clear message. Velkrith stood on the bridge, feeling sick. This was wrong. He knew it was wrong. Every instinct screamed that making examples of species for exercising their rights under collective law was exactly the kind of tyranny the collective had been founded to oppose. But the Council had spoken. "Hail the Breivixian government," he ordered. The response came from their planetary president, a 6-limbed being named Koth, who looked exhausted, terrified, but not surprised. "Commander Velkrith, have you come to accept our petition for embassy status? I've come to give you one final opportunity to withdraw it. We cannot. Our people deserve representation equal to that of other collective members. This is our legal right under Article 7 of the Integration Accords. Article 7 applies to species that maintain quota agreements. You are in violation. We are in dispute. There's a difference. Koth's voice was steady despite the warships in orbit. Commander, we're not rebelling. We're not arming. We're simply asking to renegotiate terms that we believe are unfair. And if the collective disagrees, then we continue the discussion, as equals, as partners. Koth paused. The humans showed us this was possible. There it was. The Earth precedent again. Velkrith felt his mandibles click in frustration. The humans survived because they made themselves too expensive to conquer. You do not have their advantages. No, we have something better. Koth pulled up a communication log. We have witnesses. The display showed active connections to 47 different systems. Live streaming, recording, broadcasting Velkrith's every word to species across the collective and beyond. The humans taught us many things, Commander, including the value of transparency. Whatever you do here, the galaxy will watch, will judge, will remember. Velkrith felt something cold settle in his thorax. This was a trap, not a military trap, a moral one. If he backed down, the Council would see it as weakness. Every species in the collective would know they could resist without consequence. The entire integration system would collapse. But if he followed through, if he bombed Brevix into compliance while the galaxy watched, he would prove everything the resistance movement claimed about the collective. That it was built on fear, not cooperation. That integration was conquest, wearing a diplomatic mask. You're forcing my hand, he said quietly. No, Commander. We're forcing you to choose. Be the collective you claim to be, or be the conquerors we've always suspected you were. Koth leaned forward, his multiple eyes reflecting the light of his doomed world. The humans gave us a gift, Commander. Not weapons, not ships, just the understanding that we deserve to be asked instead of told, that our compliance should be earned, not demanded, that we are people, not resources. He paused. You can kill us. You can destroy our cities. You can make an example that terrifies 100 other species into silence. But you cannot make us stop believing we deserve better. And you cannot kill an idea once it's been spoken aloud. Sarah watched the transmission from her office, surrounded by diplomatic staff who'd gone silent with horror. The collective fleet was powering weapons. Brevix was broadcasting its last moments to the galaxy, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing, she could do to stop it. Ma'am? One of her aides, a young woman named Patricia, whose grandfather had survived the Dravi bombardment of Atlanta, spoke quietly. We could what? Declare war on the collective? Get Earth glassed like we're about to watch Brevix get glassed? Sarah's voice cracked. I wrote the manual that got them killed, Patricia. I taught them to resist. I gave them hope, and now they're going to die believing it meant something. The aide was quiet for a moment. Then, didn't it mean something? Sarah looked at the communication logs. 47 species watching. Hundreds more getting recordings through back channels. The entire galaxy about to witness the collective's true nature. I don't know, she whispered. God help me. I don't know. On screen, Velkrith gave the order. The plasma lancers descended. Not on cities, not on population centers, on the orbital platforms broadcasting to the galaxy. Target their communications infrastructure, Velkrith ordered, his voice carrying the weight of a decision that would define his legacy. Well, leave the planet intact. Sir? The weapons officer's confusion was evident. The council ordered me to resolve the situation. I'm resolving it. Velkrith turned to face his crew. We are not conquerors. We do not murder billions to make political points. If that makes me a traitor to the collective, then the collective has lost its way. He opened a channel to Brevix. President Koth, your petition for embassy status is granted. Pending formal council review, Brevix is hereby reclassified as an autonomous partner with full diplomatic representation. Your quota obligations are suspended until new agreements can be negotiated. Koth's expression was pure shock. Commander, the council will accept my decision or remove me from command. Either way, your people live. Velkrith felt something loosen in his thorax. Relief, terror, freedom. The humans were right, President Koth. We've been doing this wrong for a very long time. What do we do now? Now? Velkrith looked at the 47 species still watching, still recording. Now we show them what the collective looks like when it remembers its own founding principles. He turned to his communications officer. Get me the High Chancellor and prepare for court-martial proceedings. This is going to be complicated. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Velkrith stood before the Collective Council, facing charges of insubordination, treaty violation, and unauthorized policy modification. The prosecution presented evidence of his deviance from council orders. His defense presented recordings of Koth's speech. And Sarah Chen, watching from the gallery as an invited observer, realized something extraordinary was happening. The trial wasn't really about Velkrith. It was about the collective itself. Species representatives filled the chamber. Not just Dravi, not just the council. Representatives from all 247 member species demanding to witness justice being done to the commander who'd spared Breivik. Some wanted him executed for defying the council. Others wanted him elevated for embodying collective values. High Chancellor Vexithar listened to 3 weeks of arguments, studying the assembled representatives with compound eyes that had seen the collective through 6 decades of expansion. Then he spoke. Commander Velkrith stands accused of violating direct orders from this council. The evidence is clear. He did so knowingly and deliberately. Vexithar paused. The question before us is not whether he violated orders. The question is whether those orders were just. The chamber erupted. Vexithar waited for silence with the patience of stone. For 3 centuries, the collective has integrated species into our alliance. We have told ourselves this was voluntary, that we offered benefits too obvious to refuse. But we have also held weapons in orbit and called it diplomacy. We have demanded compliance and called it cooperation. We have built an empire and called it a community. He turned to Velkrith. Commander, you violated orders because those orders would have required you to murder billions to preserve a comfortable lie. You chose truth over obedience, justice over policy. With the principles the collective was founded on over the practices it has embraced. Vexithar's carapace settled into a position of formal judgment. The council finds you guilty of insubordination. And for this crime, you are hereby promoted to High Commander of Collective Naval Forces, with a mandate to reform integration protocols across all member species. The chamber exploded with noise, shock, outrage, approval, disbelief. Vexithar raised his appendages for silence. The humans taught us an uncomfortable lesson. They showed us that respect cannot be demanded, that cooperation cannot be coerced, that true strength lies not in forcing compliance, but in earning trust. He looked directly at Sarah Chen. They also showed us that ideas, once released, cannot be contained. We can choose to be the victims of that idea, or we can choose to embody it. He turned back to the council. Effective immediately, all integration agreements are under review. All member species are granted the right to renegotiate their terms. All quotas are suspended pending mutual consensus on fair trade practices. The Dravi Collective will become what we always claimed to be, an alliance of equals, not an empire disguised as friendship. Sarah felt tears she hadn't known she was holding back finally fall. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be easy. Centuries of resentment and exploitation wouldn't vanish overnight. But it was a start. After the trial, Velkrith found Sarah Chen in one of the embassy gardens. "You were right," he said without preamble. "About everything. I was terrified I was wrong." Sarah looked up at him. "When you powered weapons over Breivik, I thought I'd killed them. Thought my manual had given them courage to die for nothing. Your manual gave them courage to demand what they deserved. I chose whether that courage would be rewarded or punished." Velkrith settled beside her. "The collective is changing, Ambassador, because you showed us we had to. You chose to change. I just provided the excuse. You provided the framework, the vocabulary, the proof that another way was possible. Velkrith's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. We studied your species extensively before first contact. Did you know that? I assumed. We concluded you were fractured, violent, self-destructive. We saw your wars, your conflicts, your inability to unify even in the face of existential threats. That we saw weakness. And now? Now I understand that your conflicts taught you something we never learned. How to disagree without destroying each other. How to rebuild after catastrophe. How to hold multiple truths simultaneously and find synthesis rather than demanding uniformity. He looked at the garden around them, earth plants growing on an alien world through cooperation and mutual interest. You are not weak because you fight among yourselves. You are strong because you survive those fights and become wiser. The collective achieved unity by demanding conformity. You achieved it by celebrating difference. Sarah smiled. High Commander, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about humanity's complete inability to agree on anything. Perhaps disagreement is not the flaw we thought it was. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we rebuild, reform, reimagine what the collective can be. Velkrith stood, his carapace catching the light. And we watch carefully, because I suspect the humans have more lessons to teach us. Just one more. Sarah stood as well. How to be allies instead of subjects. Partners instead of property. Friends instead of vassals. An important lesson, the only one that matters. Velkrith clicked his mandibles in agreement and departed, leaving Sarah alone in the garden. She pulled up her communication terminal. Messages from 17 species, 23, 47. Eyes all asking variations of the same question. How do we do what you did? Sarah started typing. The manual had been about resistance. This would be about something harder. Building something new from the ashes of what had been. She titled the document, On the Construction of Genuine Alliance, A Human Perspective. Then she got to work. 7 years after first contact, the galaxy had learned to breathe differently. High Commander Velkrith stood in what humans called the Reformation Hall, a space station built jointly by 17 species as a neutral ground for the new collective council. Not the old council. That body still existed, still governed, still made decisions. But this council was different. Every species had a vote. Every voice carried equal weight. And the arguments, by all the stars, never stopped. So the Kelvar mining operations exceed environmental sustainability thresholds by 47%. The Thexian representative was saying, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into angry reds. This violates the mutual resource protocols we all agreed to. The protocols allow for variances during industrial expansion periods, the Kelvar delegate countered, which we are currently experiencing due to demand from Brevixian shipyards. Then the Brevixians should source materials from sustainable suppliers. The Brevixians are exercising their right to free trade agreements with partners of their choosing. Velkrith listened to the debate with something approaching affection. 3 years ago, these disputes would have been resolved by collective decree. The Kelvar would have been ordered to reduce operations, and the Thexians would have been told to accept the variance. The Brevixians would have had their trade partners chosen for them. Now they argued, negotiated, compromised. It was exhausting. It was also functional democracy, and Velkrith had learned to appreciate the difference between efficient tyranny and messy freedom. The chair recognizes Ambassador Chen of Earth, he announced. Sarah stood, and the chamber quieted. Not because humans held any special authority, but because in 7 years, Earth had become something unexpected. Mediators. The Kelvar operations are in technical compliance with current protocols, Sarah began. But the Thexians are right that the protocols themselves may need revision to account for the increased industrial activity across 12 sectors. I propose we form a subcommittee to study sustainable extraction rates and report back with recommendations for updated standards. That will take months, the Thexian complained. Democracy usually does. Sarah's smile was gentle. But it produces better results than having decisions imposed from above. Trust me, we humans have tried it both ways. The Kelvar delegate clicked his approval. A subcommittee is acceptable, provided Earth serves as neutral arbiter. Earth accepts with the understanding that neutral arbiter means we'll make everyone equally unhappy with the compromise. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Actual laughter. From species who 7 years ago had been too afraid to express opinions that might displease their collective overseers. Velkerith brought the session to a close and found Sarah afterward in one of the station's observation decks. You've become very good at this, he said. At what? Mediating fights between species who 6 months ago didn't know each other existed? At building consensus from chaos. Sarah gazed out at the stars. We've had practice. Earth spent most of its history being 200 separate nations screaming at each other. Then we met you, and suddenly we had a reason to actually cooperate. Turns out the skills transfer. The old council would never have allowed this much disorder. The old council also wouldn't have discovered that the Vryn have bacteria that can process heavy metals into usable fuel, or that Thexian crystalline structures make perfect quantum computing matrices, or that Brevixian ship designs are 40% more fuel efficient than anything the Dravi had engineered. Sarah turned to him. You were so busy managing everyone that you never let them collaborate. An uncomfortable truth. Most truths are. They stood in silence, watching the station's traffic. Ships from dozens of species, trading freely. Research vessels on joint missions. Cultural exchanges that would have been unthinkable under the old integration model. I received a report yesterday, Velkerith said quietly, from our intelligence division. Spying on your own allies? High Commander, I'm shocked. Monitoring for threats. There's a difference. His mandibles clicked with something like humor. They flagged something concerning, a new manual circulating through secure channels. Sarah's expression didn't change. But Velkerith had learned to read human micro-expressions over the years. She knew exactly what he was talking about. What kind of manual? On the construction of genuine alliance, a human perspective, authored by an anonymous contributor who writes with remarkable similarity to a certain Earth ambassador. Sounds subversive. It is. The manual instructs species on how to build democratic institutions, establish trade networks outside collective oversight, and form independent alliances while technically remaining collective members. Velkerith paused. You're teaching them to resist us. Again. I'm teaching them to govern themselves. There's a difference. Is there? Sarah met his compound gaze directly. Yes. Resistance is about saying no to authority. Governance is about not needing authority in the first place. I'm not trying to destroy the collective, Velkerith. I'm trying to make it obsolete. That is also concerning. Good. You should be concerned. Because if you're not, it means you've gotten comfortable again. And comfortable powers become corrupt powers. She smiled. Consider it a favor. We're keeping you honest. Velkerith felt his combat glands activate slightly. Not threat response, but the kind of alertness that came from facing a worthy opponent. The old council would have classified you as an enemy of the state for that statement. The new council finds you deeply irritating but grudgingly necessary. Velkerith's carapace settled into what humans had learned to recognize as his version of a smile. Keep distributing your manual, Ambassador. Keep teaching species to question authority. Just remember that authority includes Earth. Oh, we have 17 different factions on Earth questioning our government's alliance policies already. Trust me, we're not exempt from our own advice. That is somehow both reassuring and horrifying. Democracy usually is. The real test came 3 months later. The Kalthari Dominion made contact at the edge of collective space. A previously unknown species. Technologically advanced, militarily powerful, and according to their initial transmissions, extremely interested in expanding into what they considered unclaimed territory. Territory that happened to include 73 collective member worlds. The emergency session convened within hours. Representatives from every major species packed the Reformation Hall, and for the first time since its creation, and the new collective council faced an external threat. They've demanded we evacuate 12 systems within the month, the Dravi intelligence officer reported. They claim historical precedent from an empire that occupied this region 4,000 years ago. Historical precedent from before most of our species achieved spaceflight, the Brevixian representative said flatly. Convenient. They have the military capability to enforce their demands. The intelligence officer pulled up tactical assessments. 300 warships, advanced shielding, weapons technology comparable to our own. The chamber erupted into arguments. Some species demanded immediate military response. Others advocated negotiation. A few suggested simply abandoning the contested systems to avoid conflict. Velkrith watched the chaos with growing concern. That the old collective would have made a decision in minutes. The High Chancellor would have decreed a course of action, and everyone would have complied. But the new collective didn't work that way, and they didn't have time for 3 months of committee meetings. The chair recognizes Ambassador Chen. Sarah stood, and Velkrith saw something in her expression that made his defensive ridges rise. She looked calm. That was never a good sign. We need to understand what we're dealing with, Sarah said. High Commander, request permission to lead a first contact delegation to meet with the Kalthari. Absolutely not. They've already made hostile demands. Sending a delegation would be standard diplomatic protocol. They made demands, yes, but they opened a communication channel. That means they're willing to talk, even if they're using threats as an opening position. Sarah pulled up the Kalthari transmissions. Look at the language structure. This is posturing. Aggressive posturing, but still negotiation rather than immediate attack. You're gambling with your life on linguistic analysis? I'm gambling with my life on 7 years of learning how species communicate when they're scared. Sarah's smile was sharp. The Kalthari aren't conquerors, High Commander. They're refugees. The chamber went silent. Explain, Velkrith demanded. Their ships are overcrowded. Their resource consumption patterns suggest population strain. They're not expanding because they want to. They're expanding because they need to. Something drove them from their original territory. Sarah pulled up her analysis. Refugees don't negotiate gently. They're desperate, which makes them dangerous, but also reachable. If you're wrong, then I die, and you can say I told you so at my memorial service. Sarah's expression softened. Velkrith, trust me. I've read the manual I wrote. This is exactly the situation where talking costs us nothing and shooting costs us everything. Velkrith looked at the assembled council. Representatives from species who 7 years ago wouldn't have dared question collective decisions. Now they were watching him, waiting to see if the new collective would choose dialogue over dominance. Permission granted, but you're taking an escort. Wouldn't dream of going without one. The meeting took place on a neutral asteroid between Collective and Kalthari space. Sarah arrived with a mixed delegation, Dravi, Brevixian, Vryn, and human. A statement that the Collective spoke with many voices now. The Kalthari delegation was impressive. 8-foot-tall beings with iridescent carapaces and too many eyes. Their leader, who introduced herself as Matriarch Skalveth, radiated the kind of controlled aggression that came from leading a species on the edge of survival. You came. Skalveth's voice resonated with harmonics that Sarah's translator struggled to render. I expected warships. We brought those too. They're just parked politely out of weapons range. Sarah gestured to the negotiating table. Shall we? The Kalthari settled across from them, and Sarah could see the stress in their movements. The way their secondary arms trembled slightly. The dull color of their carapaces that suggested malnutrition. You're not here to conquer, Sarah said quietly. You're here because you're running out of options. Skalveth's eyes focused on her with laser intensity. You know nothing of our situation. I know what desperation looks like. I know what it sounds like when a species tries to appear strong while falling apart. Sarah pulled up star charts. Where did you come from? What drove you here? For a long moment, Skalveth said nothing. Then, the Vexkari swarm. They consumed our homeworlds. 30 billion dead in 6 months. We evacuated what we could, but our colony worlds can't support the population. We need space, resources, territory. So you threatened 73 populated systems. So we did what we needed to survive. Sarah leaned back, thought about Earth, about humanity's own desperate moments, the times they'd almost destroyed themselves fighting over resources. How many Kalthari are in your fleet? 40 million, spread across 300 ships designed for 10 million. And you thought threatening the collective was your best option? We thought it was our only option. Skalveth's voice carried the weight of terrible choices. We saw your expansion, your territory, your resources. You thought we were conquerors who'd understand conquest. Sarah smiled sadly. 7 years ago, you would have been right. But things have changed. She pulled up data on collective worlds, not the contested systems the Kalthari had demanded, but 14 others. Underdeveloped, resource-rich, currently designated for long-term terraforming projects. These systems, they're not populated yet, not claimed by any specific species. The Collective Council has been planning to develop them over the next century. Sarah highlighted 3. We could accelerate that timeline. Partner with the Kalthari on joint colonization. You provide labor and expertise, we provide resources and support. In exchange, you join the collective as equal members. You would give us worlds. Skalveth's suspicion was palpable. We would offer you a partnership, with terms we'd negotiate, with obligations that would run both ways. With the understanding that membership in the new collective means contributing, not just taking. And if we refuse, then you can try to take the systems you demanded, and we'll fight you. You'll probably win. You're desperate enough to accept massive casualties, and we're still learning how to coordinate military responses across 200 species. But you'll lose ships, people, resources you can't afford to waste. Sarah met Skalveth's eyes. Or you could join us, help us instead of fighting us, survive with us instead of despite us. Skalveth was silent for a very long time. Why? She finally asked. Why offer this? Because someone offered us something similar 7 years ago. Not quite as kindly, and we had to fight for it, but the principle is the same. Sarah pulled up images of Earth, of human cities rebuilt after bombardment, of the scars they still carried. We know what it's like to nearly die. We know what desperation costs, and we know that the galaxy works better when we help each other instead of consuming each other. This is not how power operates. It's not how the old collective operated, but we're building something different. Sarah smiled. It's messy. It's argumentative. It requires constant negotiation and compromise. But it works, and it doesn't require anyone to die unnecessarily. She stood. The offer stands for 48 hours. Talk to your people. Consider your options. Choose survival over pride. Sarah turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and matriarch, if you do join us, prepare for committee meetings. So many committee meetings. Democracy is terrible that way. The Kalthari accepted 36 hours later. The integration, true integration, negotiated and voluntary, took 8 months. 8 months of arguments about resource allocation, territory rights, cultural preservation, and approximately 400 other points of contention. But at the end, the collective had 248 member species, and the Kalthari had homes. The celebration was held on Reformation Hall. Skalveth stood beside Sarah, watching species from across the galaxy mingle in ways that would have been impossible under the old order. Your species did this, Skalveth said quietly. Changed everything. Our species survived you trying to kill us. Then we decided to teach everyone else how to survive. Sarah sipped something that probably wasn't wine, but tasted close enough. Turns out, spite is a powerful motivator for social reform. The Dravi could have destroyed you. They could have tried, would have cost them more than we were worth. Sarah looked at Velkrith across the room, deep in conversation with a Thexian admiral. But they chose to learn instead. That's the real miracle. Not that we resisted, that they listened. Skalveth's carapace shifted colors. Contemplation. My people nearly destroyed you for resources we didn't strictly need. Now we're allies. That's how it works. You threaten us, we negotiate. Everyone ends up in committee meetings arguing about mineral rights. It's very efficient if you enjoy bureaucracy. I hate bureaucracy. Everyone does, but it beats the alternative. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the party. Watching species who 7 years ago had been too afraid to speak freely now arguing passionately about trade policies and cultural exchange programs. What happens now? Skalveth asked. Now we keep building, keep negotiating, keep arguing. Sarah's smile turned mischievous. And we prepare for the next crisis, because there's always a next crisis. You sound almost eager. Not eager, just realistic. The galaxy is big and complicated, and full of species who don't know about the new collective yet. Some of them will be friendly, some will be aggressive, some will be somewhere in between. She pulled up her ever-present data terminal. So we keep writing manuals, keep teaching species how to negotiate instead of fight. Keep proving that cooperation beats conquest. Even when cooperation is exhausting? Especially then. Velkrith found Sarah on the observation deck hours later, after the party had wound down. You should be celebrating, he said. I am celebrating, quietly, with stars and silence. The human way? The exhausted diplomat way? Sarah gestured to the view. 7 years ago, you parked a warship over New York and threatened to vaporize us. Now we're hosting parties for species who threatened to vaporize other people. It's progress, I think. Significant progress. Velkrith settled beside her. Though I suspect you're not satisfied. Never. Satisfaction is for people who don't see the next problem coming. Sarah pulled up her terminal. I've been tracking anomalies in the outer sectors. Unexplained ship disappearances, strange energy readings, signs of something big moving through unclaimed space. Another crisis? Or an opportunity? Won't know until we investigate. She looked at him. Think the new collective is ready for whatever that turns out to be? Velkrith thought about the past 7 years. The arguments, the compromises, the painful reformation of an empire into an actual alliance. The Kalthari integration that had almost sparked civil war before cooler heads prevailed. No, he said honestly. We're never ready, but we face it anyway. Good answer. They watched the stars in comfortable silence. Sarah, Velkrith said eventually, thank you. For what? For being exactly as irritating as we needed you to be. Sarah laughed. The sound echoed in the observation deck like bells. Hi, Commander. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. I doubt that. You'd be surprised. Humans appreciate directness. She stood, stretching. I should go. Early meeting tomorrow with the Brevixian Vryn Trade Dispute Committee. The one that's been deadlocked for 6 weeks? That's the one. Someone has to mediate, and apparently I draw the short straw. She paused at the door. Velkrith, keep questioning everything. Keep reforming. Keep making the collective earn the loyalty of its members. The moment you stop, the moment you get comfortable, if someone like me shows up to remind you that empires fall, but alliances endure. A threat, Ambassador? A promise. From one ally to another. She left. Velkrith stood alone in the observation deck, watching ships from 248 species navigate the space lanes with a coordination that came from cooperation rather than coercion. 7 years ago, he'd been ordered to conquer Earth. Instead, Earth had conquered them with ideas. Not the worst defeat a military commander had ever suffered. He pulled up the latest intelligence reports on the outer sector anomalies. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together, arguing, negotiating, compromising, the human way, the new collective way. Velkrith clicked his mandibles in satisfaction and got to work. The two-legged storm had taught the galaxy to weather itself differently, and the forecast looked promising. 15 years after first contact. Transmission from Deep Space Exploration Vessel Wanderer's Hope, Joint Collective Mission. Captain's Log, Thexian Commander Ixthor recording. We've made contact with a new species, the Genkai. Technologically advanced, militarily formidable. They've given us 72 hours to evacuate this sector or face integration into their hierarchy. They seem very confident. I've forwarded them Ambassador Chen's manuals, both editions, and I've requested she join us for first contact negotiations. Her response was, "Colourful, but she's coming." The Genkai don't know it yet, but they just woke the storm. I almost feel sorry for them. Almost.